Level 1. The Applicant. You're 23. You graduated from Tufts with a degree in comparative politics and a minor in Mandarin you can barely hold a conversation in yet. You apply on a Sunday night, the way you'd apply for any other job, an online portal, a resume, a cover letter you rewrite 4 times. 4 months of silence. Then a letter with no letterhead, a return address that's just a P.O. box in Reston, Virginia. You're invited for an assessment. The building has no sign. The receptionist takes your phone before you sit down. 2 days. A polygraph. A psychological battery. A panel of 3 people who ask you questions and then watch your face longer than they listen to your answer. One question lodges itself somewhere and doesn't leave. Is there anything in your life you'd be unwilling to have printed on the front page of a newspaper? You answer honestly. You still think about the half-second before you did. In the waiting room afterward, a woman about your age sits 2 chairs down, legal pad on her knee, not writing anything on it. She introduces herself as Mara. Georgetown, she says. Securities studies. Neither of you asks the other what you're doing there. You both already know. 9 months later, a second letter. Conditional acceptance, Directorate of Operations. You'll report to a training facility in coastal Virginia that doesn't appear on any map you can find. You tell your mother you got a State Department analyst job in D.C. She hugs you like she believes it. You feel the first weight of the double life settle in, not guilt exactly, just the understanding that from now on, everyone who loves you will love a version of you that's slightly incomplete. Level 2. The Farm. You're 24. The facility looks like summer camp, pine trees, a lake, gravel roads, until you notice the firing ranges tucked behind the tree-line. Your class has 26 people, a former Army Ranger, a woman who was a translator in Kabul, a man who spent 6 years as a homicide detective in Detroit, and Mara, 3 racks down in the women's dorm, work name Cassidy, who you recognize the first morning by the same stillness she had in that waiting room. You go by work names for the first month. Yours is Alden. The coursework doesn't let up. Surveillance detection. Dead drops. How to build a cover identity that survives someone checking. How to lie in a way that feels less like deception and more like a truth you've simply chosen to occupy. In week 8, you're given a cover name, a mid-level insurance adjuster, and sent into a nearby town to elicit information from a retired postal worker who has no idea he's part of a training exercise. You sit with him at a diner counter for 35 minutes and walk away with the names of 2 of his former co-workers and the fact that his son works at a defense contractor in Maryland. You drive back and write the report. What you feel isn't pride and isn't guilt. You learn to file feelings the way you'd file a document. Accessible, controlled, not left lying open. Mara runs the same exercise an hour behind you, different target, same town. You compare notes over vending machine coffee that night, the only unguarded conversation either of you has had in 8 weeks. It becomes a habit that outlasts the farm by 20 years. One trainee's bunk is empty by Thursday. Nobody explains it. You stop asking. At the end, 21 of you remain. You're posted to Vienna. Mara's posted to Amman. You don't know yet how often your cables will cross. Level 3. The Case Officer. You're 27. You work out of the embassy under diplomatic cover as a junior cultural affairs officer. Your real job is recruiting and running human sources, humant, in the language of the building. Find people with access. Build trust with them. Convince them, slowly, to hand over what their government would call treason and what you'd call cooperation. By your 2nd year, you're running 2 sources. One is a mid-level Austrian trade ministry official who wants money and nothing else. Clean, transactional, easy to predict. The other is a Belarusian engineer with tangential access to a weapons procurement network, motivated by something harder to name. Grievance, maybe, or the seduction of matching to someone powerful. You meet him every 3 weeks, never the same cafe twice. 6 months in, he goes quiet. 2 weeks of nothing. Then a message through a cutout. He wants to stop, no explanation given. You write the termination report and flag it ambiguous. Possible surveillance, possible fear, possible a life that simply outgrew the arrangement. Your station chief signs off without comment. You never learn what happened to him. You call Mara that week, on the secure line reserved for exactly this. She doesn't tell you it'll make sense eventually. She tells you it won't, and that you'll learn to work anyway. It's the more honest thing to say, and you start to understand that this job is built almost entirely out of questions that never resolve. If you've made it this far, you already know what rank you want to see next. Say it in the comments. I read all of them. Level 4. The Targeting Officer. You're 31. You're back at Langley, in a windowless office on the 3rd floor, walking past the memorial wall with its unnamed stars every morning without quite meaning to look at it. Your job now isn't running sources, it's finding them before anyone else does. You study a foreign ministry, a terrorist financing network, a state intelligence service, and map the human terrain inside it. Who's underpaid? Who's overlooked? Who has a sick parent and debt nobody at work knows about? Who travels internationally enough to be approached quietly? Mara's back too, 2 floors up, running a different target set. You get lunch on Thursdays when both your schedules allow it, which is less often than either of you would like, and exactly as often as the job permits. One targeting package you build over 7 months results in the recruitment of a mid-level official inside a hostile service's own personnel directorate, a source who, over the next 4 years, will help identify 3 of that service's own recruitment attempts against American officials before they succeed. You never meet him. You never will. Your name isn't on the cable that reports the win. That's the job at this level. The work is real, the credit is invisible, and you learn to be at peace with both. Level 5. Deputy Chief of Station. You're 36. You're posted to Nairobi, second in command of a station running operations across 3 countries. You're no longer primarily a case officer. You're managing 11 of them, reviewing their operational plans, deciding which risks are worth authorizing and which aren't. A junior officer under your supervision, 3 years in, wants to accelerate a recruitment you think is moving too fast. You slow it down against his objection. 2 months later, intelligence surfaces that the target had been flagged by a hostile services counterintelligence unit the week before his planned approach. Had you let the pace continue, the officer would likely have walked directly into a controlled operation. He doesn't thank you out loud. He starts running every questionable call past you first. That's the version of trust this job produces. Mara makes deputy chief the same year, in Amman. You send her a 2-word cable when you hear. She sends one back. Neither of you needs more than that anymore. Level 6. Chief of Station. You're 41. You run the entire Nairobi station now. Operations, liaison relationships with 3 separate host country services, and the physical and psychological safety of every officer under your command. A regional crisis erupts, a coup attempt in a neighboring country your station has quietly monitored for years. You have 4 sources inside different factions, and for 6 days you're the primary channel feeding Washington real-time assessment while a situation room half a world away makes decisions based partly on your judgment calls. One of your sources goes dark for 18 hours during the worst of it. You don't sleep those 18 hours. He resurfaces safe. You write the after-action report at 4 a.m. and don't feel triumphant. You feel like someone who was handed a weight and managed, barely, not to drop it. Mara calls at 5 a.m. her time to ask if you're alive before she asks anything else. It's the kind of call only someone who's read the same cable traffic knows to make. Level 7. Senior Operations Officer, Counterintelligence. You're 47. You've moved into counterintelligence, the discipline of watching your own service for signs it's been penetrated and watching your own sources for signs they've turned. A long-running source, in place for 9 years, starts showing subtle behavioral shifts, shorter messages, thinner reporting, meetings pushed later and later. Field assessment says possible surveillance. Your assessment, reading the same data, says possible controlled contact, meaning he may already be compromised, feeding you material a hostile service wants you to believe. The distinction matters enormously. Pulling him prematurely could burn the very method that flagged him. You convene a review panel. Mara sits on it. She's in counterintelligence too, now, a different division, but the panel pulls from across the building for something this sensitive. It's the first time in 18 years you've disagreed with her on the record. She votes to pull him. You vote to hold. The panel splits along other lines and the decision falls to you. You make the call to leave him in place under enhanced scrutiny for 60 more days. On day 41, he trips a prearranged distress signal. You extract him within 36 hours. He's alive. He tells debriefers the hostel service identified him 5 months earlier and had been running him as a controlled asset the entire time. Mara doesn't say, "I told you so." She doesn't have to, and you both know that's worse. You order a full retrospective review of everything he ever reported. It takes 11 months. You don't sleep well through most of them. Level 8. Director of the CIA. You're 58. The president calls on a Monday morning while you're in a budget review. He offers you the job in 5 sentences. You ask for one night before answering, not because you're unsure, but because a decision this size deserves at least one honest reckoning before you say yes. The Senate confirms you 68 to 31. The marble in the lobby hasn't changed. The way the building moves around you has. Your day starts with a 6:30 a.m. briefing covering every active threat across every division, then the president's daily brief at the White House. The work here is barely intelligence anymore. It's negotiation, institutional maintenance, constant recalibration between your agency, the DNI, the Pentagon's own intelligence apparatus, and the FBI's overlapping domestic authority. You bring Mara in as one of your deputy directors. It isn't nepotism, her record makes the case on its own, but you notice, signing the appointment, that it's the first time in 31 years you've had her stillness in the room instead of on the other end of a secure line. 8 months in, operational details from a sensitive collection program leak to a journalist. Not that the program exists, but specifics that could only have come from someone with narrow access. You authorize a counterintelligence investigation. It runs 7 months and identifies a mid-grade analyst who leaked out of sincere belief the program crossed a constitutional line. You sit with the distinction between someone who leaks to damage an institution and someone who leaks because they believe the institution damaged something larger than itself. You decide the distinction, while real, doesn't change your obligation. You authorize the DOJ referral. You go back to work. Level 9. The former director. You're 63. You leave on a January morning, the way almost everyone eventually does. A new administration, a desire to install their own person. The handover is professional. 2 weeks of briefings, a handshake, a walk out of a building you know, somehow, will never fully release you. The offers come fast. Think tanks, contractors, a university that wants you running a new center on intelligence and public policy. You take the university job. You teach a graduate seminar, 14 students, all of them asking questions you spent 30 years legally unable to answer. You answer what you're able to. One student, a scholarship kid from Cleveland with the sharpest analytical instincts in the room, asks you near the end of the term whether it was worth it. You sit with the question longer than you've sat with any question in years. You tell her worth is the wrong frame, the work was necessary. Whether you did it well is the question you'll spend the rest of your life answering honestly. She writes it down. You wonder if it's the truest thing you've said out loud in a decade. Mara stays on another 2 years before she leaves too. She sends you a 2-word text the day she walks out. You know exactly what it means. You always have. Level 10. The legacy. You're 72. Your name surfaces in 2 declassified historical reviews over the past several years. In one, your role is redacted entirely. In the other, a footnote references a targeting authorization from Nairobi and a separate internal review concerning a source who didn't survive an extraction attempt years after you'd moved on. His name is still classified. You know it anyway. You think about him more than you think about any program, any budget line, any policy win. You give a commencement address at a small college in Vermont. The graduates are 22, the age you were in a nondescript building in Tyson's Corner, answering a question about shame you're still, in some sense, answering. You tell them, every institution asks something of you. The only question worth a life is whether what it asks is equal to what it takes. Mara's in the 3rd row. She flew in for this, wouldn't say why when you asked. Some friendships don't require a why anymore. She's the only person in the auditorium who understood, 40 years ago on a folding chair outside a building with no sign, exactly what you were both agreeing to. Afterward, a young man in a dark suit finds you near the edge of the parking lot. He's polished, composed, a half-beat too still. He mentions an office in Northern Virginia and says he has a few questions about your time in Nairobi, if you have a moment. You say you have a moment. You glance back once. Mara's still watching from the steps, the same stillness she had at 23, and then you walk with him toward the shade at the edge of the lawn. The institution, it turns out, never entirely lets go. And somewhere underneath everything you've carried, you're not sure you ever wanted it to.